The rattling of stagecoach wheels against the dusty trail came to an abrupt halt as Gwendolyn Zimmerman clutched her worn leather valise tightly to her chest, her knuckles white with anxiety. The year was 1876, and the untamed wilderness of Colorado Territory stretched before her like a vast unknown sea. She had been traveling for 3 days straight, each jolt of the coach a painful reminder of the bitter words that had driven her westward. "You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born." At 20 years old, Gwendolyn Gwen, to the few who'd ever shown her kindness, had finally been cast out by her stepfather in Boston, a man whose patience for supporting his late wife's useless, bookish daughter had run dry. With her mother 2 years in the grave and no marriage prospects on the horizon, Gwen had been given a one-way ticket west and instructions to make herself useful to her distant aunt in Silver Creek, a mining town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. "End of the line for you, miss," the driver called down, his weathered face appearing at the coach window. Silver Creek, not much to look at, but it's home to some. Gwen peered out at the single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, a saloon, a general store, what appeared to be a small bank, and several other establishments stretched down the thoroughfare. Men in dusty clothes moved about with purpose, and a few women in plain dresses hurried along the boardwalks. This hardly resembled the Denver she'd passed through, with its growing signs of civilization. "My aunt," Gwen said, her voice barely audible above the creak of the coach's frame. "Mrs. Amelia Thornton. Do you know where I might find her?" The driver's expression darkened. "Thornton Place is just past the edge of town. Follow the road north about half a mile." He paused, studying her fine, if travel-worn, Eastern clothes. "Miss, you might want to know—" "Thank you, that will be sufficient," Gwen interrupted, summoning what little courage she possessed. She couldn't bear to hear more bad news, not after all she'd endured. As she stepped down from the coach, the dust immediately coated her shoes and the hem of her navy traveling dress. The driver unceremoniously dropped her trunk beside her, tipped his hat, and climbed back onto his perch. With a crack of his whip, the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving Gwen alone in a town where not a single soul knew her name. A gust of wind caught her bonnet, nearly pulling it from her head. As she reached up to secure it, she felt the stares of several townsfolk who had paused to watch the stagecoach's arrival. Their curious gazes made her face flush with discomfort. "Need some help with that trunk, miss?" a deep voice asked. Gwen turned to find a tall man with broad shoulders standing nearby. He wore simple clothes, worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest. The well-used Stetson on his head shadowed his features, but she could make out sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw covered in stubble. Gwen began, but faltered. Back east, she would never speak to a strange man unaccompanied, but this was the frontier. Different rules applied here. "Yes, thank you. I need to reach my aunt's home just north of town." "You're Amelia Thornton's niece?" The man's tone shifted, something like concern creeping into his voice. "Yes. Do you know her?" Gwen asked, hope rising in her chest. The man glanced down the road, then back at her. "I know of her. The name's Victor Quinn. I run cattle on the North Range. Mind if I ask how long it's been since you've heard from your aunt?" "Nearly 8 months," Gwen admitted. "Her last letter invited me to come stay, to help with her boarding house. My family." She trailed off, unwilling to share the humiliating truth of her circumstances. Victor Quinn's expression softened. "Miss Zimmerman, Gwendolyn Zimmerman." "Miss Zimmerman, I think there are some things you should know before you head out there." He glanced around the busy street. "Maybe we could talk at the cafe across the way. It's respectable widow Johnston runs it." Something in his manner, a certain gravity, sent a chill down Gwen's spine. "Has something happened to my aunt?" Victor hesitated, then nodded once. "I'm afraid so, miss." The cafe was quiet, with only 2 other tables occupied. A plump woman with gray-streaked hair brought them coffee without being asked, giving Gwen a curious but kindly look before retreating to the kitchen. "Your aunt passed away 4 months ago," Victor said once they were alone, his voice low and gentle. "Influenza swept through town last winter. Took 6 folks, including Mrs. Thornton." Gwen felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. Her cup clattered against its saucer as her hands trembled. "I see," she managed, though in truth, she saw nothing but a void where her future should have been. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you," Victor continued. "The boarding house has been closed up since. Her lawyer, Mr. Holbrook, handled what affairs she had. And what am I to do now?" The question escaped Gwen's lips unbidden, barely a whisper. Victor Quinn studied her for a long moment. His eyes, she noticed now, were a striking blue-green, like mountain lakes she'd seen depicted in paintings. "Do you have means to return east?" Gwen shook her head, shame burning in her chest. "No, there is nothing for me there." Victor nodded, seeming to understand more than she'd said. "Silver Creek needs a schoolteacher. Our last one married a cattle buyer from Denver and left 2 months ago. The position comes with a small cabin behind the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's clean and dry." "A teacher?" Gwen's education at Miss Porter's school for young ladies had been thorough, if focused primarily on making her an acceptable wife for a businessman or low-level politician. "I have no experience teaching. Can you read, write, and cipher?" "Yes, of course." "That puts you ahead of half the town already." A smile briefly transformed his serious face, creating creases at the corners of his eyes. "Town council meets tomorrow at noon. I sit on it. I could introduce you, if you'd like." The kindness of this stranger was overwhelming. Gwen blinked rapidly to hold back tears. "Why would you help me? Mr. Wyke. Quinn, you don't know me." Victor's gaze dropped to his coffee cup. "I knew your aunt. She was a good woman who helped me once when I needed it. Consider it repaying a debt." He looked up again. "And out here, Miss Zimmerman, we help folks who need helping. That's how we all survive." "Then I would be grateful for your assistance," Gwen said, straightening her shoulders. "And please, call me Gwen." "Gwen," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "You can stay at Mrs. Johnston's boarding house tonight. I'll see to your trunk." As he lifted her heavy trunk with apparent ease, Gwen couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had placed Victor Quinn in her path at the precise moment when all hope seemed lost. She had no way of knowing that this chance meeting would alter the course of both their lives irrevocably. Mrs. Johnston's boarding house was neat and smelled of fresh baked bread. The older woman fussed over Gwen, insisting she eat a proper meal and take a hot bath before retiring. In the small but clean room, Gwen sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to weep silently. For her aunt, for her lost mother, for the cruel dismissal by her stepfather, and for her own uncertain future. Morning came too quickly. Gwen dressed in her best remaining outfit, a simple green dress with minimal adornment, and carefully pinned her chestnut hair into a modest style. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a young woman with large hazel eyes in a face too thin from worry and travel. She pinched her cheeks for color and straightened her spine. "You'll do," she told her reflection firmly. "You must." Victor Quinn arrived promptly at 11:30, having exchanged his working clothes for a clean shirt and vest, though he still wore denim trousers rather than proper suit pants. His dark hair was damp and combed back, revealing a strong forehead and those striking eyes. "You look rested," he commented as he escorted her down the street toward the town hall, a small clapboard building with fresh white paint. "Mrs. Johnston was very kind," Gwen replied, acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed. "Everyone seems to be staring." Victor's mouth curved slightly. We don't get many new faces, especially not educated Eastern ladies. Word travels fast in small towns. And what word is traveling about me, Mr. Quinn? That you're Amelia Thornton's niece, come to apply for the teaching position, he said simply, and that I'm helping you get settled. And does that cause speculation? Gwen asked cautiously. Victor glanced down at her, amusement warming his eyes. It might, but folks around here know better than to speculate too loudly about my business. There was something in his tone that suggested a history, but before Gwen could inquire further, they arrived at the town hall. Inside, 5 men of varying ages sat around a scarred wooden table. They stood as Victor led her in. Gentlemen, this is Miss Gwendolyn Zimmerman, Mrs. Thornton's niece from Boston, Victor announced. Miss Zimmerman, the Silver Creek Town Council? The introductions passed in a blur. Mayor Barton, a portly man with an impressive mustache. Mr. Holbrook, the lawyer who had handled her aunt's affairs. Mr. Peterson, the banker. Mr. Miller, who owned the general store, and Mr. Blackburn, an older rancher with a weathered face and sharp eyes. I understand you're interested in the teaching position, Miss Zimmerman, Mayor Barton said once they were all seated. Do you have any experience in education? Gwen folded her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. I completed my studies at Miss Porter's school in Boston, sir. While I have not taught professionally, I often tutored younger girls in literature, mathematics, and history. I speak passable French and can play the piano, though I don't see one in your schoolhouse. You've seen our school already? Mr. Peterson asked, raising an eyebrow. No, sir, but most frontier schools lack such amenities, Gwen replied, drawing on what little she knew of Western territories. The men exchanged impressed glances. Term starts in 3 weeks, Mayor Barton explained. We have 28 children aged 6 to 16 who attend regularly, more during winter months when the ranches don't need as much help. Pay is $30 a month, plus the cabin, firewood, and credit at Miller's store for basic supplies. It wasn't much, Gwen knew, but it was independence. And what would my duties entail beyond teaching? Maintaining the schoolhouse, organizing any town events that involve the children, and upholding moral standards befitting your position, Mr. Holbrook stated. Silver Creek may be small, but we pride ourselves on being civilized. The men asked a few more questions about her background and educational philosophy. Gwen answered as best she could, growing more confident with each response. Finally, Mayor Barton cleared his throat. Gentlemen, shall we put it to a vote? If I might say something first, Victor interjected. He had remained silent throughout the interview, but now all eyes turned to him. Silver Creek needs stability. Miss Zimmerman has shown courage in coming west alone, and intelligence in her responses today. I believe she would be an asset to our community. His endorsement carried obvious weight. The vote was unanimous in her favor. Congratulations, Miss Zimmerman, Mayor Barton said, extending his hand. Welcome to Silver Creek. As they walked back toward Mrs. Johnston's, Gwen's heart felt lighter than it had in months. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Your support made all the difference. Victor, he corrected. If we're going to be neighbors, you might as well use my Christian name. We're to be neighbors? He nodded. My ranch, the Lazy Q, borders the north edge of town. I'm not around much during cattle season, but my foreman, Hank, can help if you need anything when I'm away. You've been extraordinarily kind to a stranger, Gwen said softly. I won't forget it. Victor stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was serious, almost troubled. Your aunt helped me once, when no one else would. The least I can do is return the favor. Before Gwen could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. A man staggered out, clearly drunk despite the early hour, followed by an angry bartender. Get on home, Jenkins, the bartender shouted, And don't come back until you can pay your tab. The drunk man stumbled, nearly falling into the street where a wagon was approaching. Without hesitation, Victor strode across and pulled the man back onto the boardwalk, preventing what could have been a fatal accident. "Let me help you home, Jenkins," Victor said firmly, supporting the swaying man. "Don't need your help, Quinn," Jenkins slurred, but made no move to pull away. Victor looked back at Gwen. "Excuse me, Miss Zimmerman. This won't take long. Would you mind waiting at the cafe?" Gwen nodded, watching as Victor guided the drunk man down the street. The incident revealed another facet of the cattleman's character, a willingness to help even those who showed him no gratitude. In the cafe, Mrs. Johnston herself brought Gwen a cup of tea. "I see you've made the acquaintance of our Mr. Quinn," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "He's been very helpful," Gwen replied carefully. Mrs. Johnston sat down uninvited, leaning forward. "Not many know his full story. Came here 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination. Now he runs one of the most successful operations in the county. Man's got grit, that one." "He mentioned my aunt helped him once," Gwen ventured. "That she did." Mrs. Johnston nodded. "Your aunt had a good eye for character. When Victor first arrived, wounded and half dead after a run-in with road agents, she took him in, nursed him back to health. Folks were suspicious handsome stranger with no background, but Amelia stood by him. When he struck it lucky with that cattle drive to Cheyenne, first thing he did was pay her back every penny, with interest." The bell above the cafe door jingled as Victor returned. Mrs. Johnston patted Gwen's hand and rose. "You've got yourself a good friend there, Miss Zimmerman. Those are rare in this world." Victor joined Gwen at the table. "Sorry about that. Jenkins has troubles, but he's harmless." "You seem to make a habit of helping people in difficult situations," Gwen observed. A shadow crossed his face. "Not always. But I try to do what's right." He changed the subject. "Would you like to see your new home? Mr. Holbrook gave me the key to your aunt's house as well. There might be things you'd want to bring to the school cabin." The school cabin was indeed small. One main room with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs and shelves along one wall. A tiny second room held a washtub and chamber pot. It was simple but clean, with 2 windows that let in ample light. "The previous teacher kept a garden out back," Victor explained, showing her a small plot of land behind the cabin. "Soil's good here." "It's perfect," Gwen said, meaning it. After the opulent but cold house of her stepfather, this humble space felt like freedom. Her aunt's boarding house was larger but had been closed up for months. Dust covered every surface and the air was stale. Victor pried open windows while Gwen explored, finding familiar items from her aunt's letters: the patchwork quilt, the collection of pressed wildflowers, the bookshelf filled with beloved titles. "She mentioned this in her letters," Gwen said softly, running her fingers over a beautiful writing desk. "It was my grandfather's." "You should take it for the cabin," Victor suggested, "and anything else that would make it feel like home." By late afternoon, with Victor's help and a borrowed wagon, Gwen had transported several pieces of furniture, books, linens, and kitchenware to the school cabin. Mrs. Johnston contributed a basket of food essentials, and Mr. Miller from the general store delivered a welcome gift of lamp oil and candles. As twilight approached, Victor prepared to leave. "I've got to get back to the ranch," he explained. "Calving season's almost done, but there's always something that needs attention." "I can't thank you enough," Gwen said, standing in the doorway of her new home. "You've turned what could have been a disaster into a new beginning." Victor shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's what neighbors do." He put on his hat. "The school board will come by tomorrow to discuss the curriculum. I'll check in on you in a few days, if that's all right." "I'd like that," Gwen said, surprised to realize how much she meant it. As Victor rode away, Gwen watched until he disappeared from view. Then she turned back to her small cabin and began the work of making it truly hers. The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Gwen cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized books and supplies, and developed lesson plans for students of varying ages and abilities. She planted vegetables in the garden patch and arranged her aunt's furniture to make the cabin cozy. To her surprise, mothers of future students began visiting, bringing small gifts: jam, fresh eggs, a handmade quilt, and staying to chat. Through these conversations, Gwen learned more about Silver Creek and its inhabitants. She heard about the harsh winter that had claimed her aunt, about the conflict between cattle ranchers and the newer sheep farmers moving into the area, and about the upcoming Founders' Day celebration in September. She also heard about Victor Quinn. According to town gossip, he had arrived in Silver Creek 5 years earlier, badly wounded and with little to his name. Through hard work and shrewd business sense, he had built the Lazy Q into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. He employed 6 full-time hands and hired more during roundup season. He was respected but somewhat feared due to his formidable reputation as a man not to be crossed. Never married, though plenty have tried to catch his eye, Mrs. Parker, the blacksmith's wife, confided during one visit. Some say he left a sweetheart back east. Others think he's still grieving his family parents, and sister died in a fire, I heard. Gwen listened but formed no judgments. The Victor she knew had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Whatever his past held, she had no right to pry. True to his word, Victor checked on her several times during those weeks. His visits were brief but became something Gwen looked forward to with increasing anticipation. He brought her a young apple tree for her garden. It'll take years to bear fruit, but it's good to plan ahead. Helped fix a leak in the cabin roof, and once arrived with a beautiful chestnut mare. School's too far from some of the outlying farms for the little ones to walk every day, he explained. A teacher needs a horse. I can't accept such a gift, Gwen protested, even as she stroked the mare's velvet nose. It's not a gift, it's a necessity, Victor insisted. Consider it an investment in the town's future. Gwen named the mare Penny for her copper-colored coat, and quickly grew attached to the gentle animal. She had ridden in Boston's parks occasionally, but now practiced daily, determined to become comfortable in the saddle. As the first day of school approached, Gwen's anxiety grew. What if the children didn't respect her? What if the parents found her lacking? What if she failed in this new role, just as her stepfather had always predicted she would fail at everything? The evening before classes were to begin, Gwen sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the path leading from town. Victor approached on his stallion, a magnificent black horse he called Shadow. Thought you might be feeling nervous about tomorrow, he said by way of greeting, dismounting with fluid grace. Gwen smiled wryly. Is it that obvious? First days are always hard, he said, settling beside her on the porch step. Thought you might like some company. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Victor was not a man given to idle chatter, Gwen had learned, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. Tell me about Boston, he said eventually. What made you leave? The question caught her off guard. They had spoken of many things in their brief encounters, books they had read, the challenges of frontier life, the personalities of Silver Creek, but never about their pasts. I didn't leave, Gwen admitted after a moment. I was sent away. The shame of it still burned. But something about the gathering darkness and Victor's steady presence made honesty easier. My mother died 2 years ago. My stepfather tolerated me while she lived, but afterward, well, he made it clear I was a burden he never wanted. When Aunt Amelia wrote suggesting I come west, he purchased the ticket before I had even finished reading her letter. Victor was quiet for so long that Gwen wondered if she had said too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. A man who would cast out his own family doesn't deserve the name of father. He wasn't my father by blood, Gwen clarified. He married my mother when I was 12, after my father died of consumption. He never wanted a ready-made family, but mother came with a modest inheritance that helped his business interests. Still, Victor said, to send a young woman alone across the country. It's worked out better than I could have hoped, Gwen said softly. I've found a purpose here. People who value what I can contribute. Victor turned to look at her, his expression hidden in the gathering darkness. Silver Creek is lucky to have you, Gwen. The way he said her name sent a flutter through her chest that she didn't quite understand. And you? She asked, feeling bold. What brought you west? He was silent for so long that Gwen thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low and measured, as if carefully choosing each word. I needed a fresh start. There was trouble back in Pennsylvania. My family's farm was failing. My father took to drinking, my mother to praying. When the bank foreclosed, my father couldn't face the shame. Victor paused, his breath catching. He shot my mother, then himself. I found them. Oh, Victor, Gwen whispered, horrified. I was 19, had a 16-year-old sister, Rebecca. We moved in with our uncle, but he was a hard man. Worked Becky like a servant and me nearly to death in his lumberyard. When Becky caught pneumonia, he wouldn't spend money on a doctor. Victor's voice had gone flat, emotionless. She died in my arms. Without thinking, Gwen reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm and roughened by work. I left the next day, Victor continued. Worked my way west, doing whatever jobs I could find. Was riding with a cattle drive when road agents attacked us near Silver Creek. I took a bullet meant for the trail boss. Your aunt found me half dead on the road and nursed me back to health. She was a good woman, Gwen said. She saved my life, and not just by tending my wounds. Victor turned his hand beneath hers, curling his fingers around her smaller ones. She reminded me that there were still good people in the world worth living for. They sat in silence, hands joined as the stars multiplied overhead. Gwen felt a connection to this man that transcended their brief acquaintance. They had both lost family, both been cast adrift, both found an unexpected haven in Silver Creek. You'll do fine tomorrow, Victor said finally, gently releasing her hand and standing. Those children will love you, same as everyone else around here is starting to. His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. Thank you for coming tonight, for sharing your story. Victor nodded, his tall form silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Some burdens are lighter when shared. As he mounted Shadow and rode away, Gwen realized the fluttering in her chest had intensified. She was falling for Victor Quinn, a man whose past was as complicated as her own, whose kindness had given her a new start, and whose rare smile made her feel like she'd glimpsed something precious and rare. Don't be a fool, she whispered to herself as she went inside. A man like that isn't looking for an inexperienced Eastern girl with nothing to her name. But as she prepared for bed, Gwen couldn't help wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a chance for something more between them. The first day of school exceeded Gwen's most optimistic expectations. 26 children arrived, clean-faced and nervous, clutching slates and lunch pails. From 6-year-old Tommy Parker with his missing front teeth to 16-year-old Sarah Jenkins, who confided that this would be her last term before she had to work full-time at her family's farm. Each student showed a genuine desire to learn. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were dedicated to reading, writing, and arithmetic, differentiated by age and ability. Afternoons featured history, science, and, on Fridays, art or music. Gwen started a small school library with books donated by townspeople and encouraged her older students to help teach the younger ones. September brought the Founders' Day celebration, marking the 20th anniversary of Silver Creek's establishment. The entire town gathered for a day of feasting, games, and dancing. Gwen found herself at the center of many introductions, no longer the strange Eastern girl, but our teacher, spoken with evident pride. "You've won them over," Victor commented as they watched three-legged races in the town square. He had been busy with fall roundup but had made time for the celebration, arriving in a clean shirt and vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. "The children make it easy," Gwen replied. "They're so eager to learn." "It's more than that," Victor insisted. "You care about them. It shows." The conversation was interrupted by Mayor Barton announcing the start of the dance. Musicians set up on the boardwalk, and couples began to form on the packed earth of the town square. "Miss Zimmerman," Victor said formally, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Dancing with Victor felt like floating. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace, guiding her confidently through the steps of a waltz. Gwen was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, and the way his eyes never left her face. "People are watching," she murmured, noticing the speculative glances from townspeople. "Let them," he replied. "I'm dancing with the prettiest woman at the celebration." Gwen blushed at the compliment. "Hardly that." "You don't see yourself clearly," Victor said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're beautiful, Gwen. Not just your face, though that's lovely enough. Your spirit. Your kindness. The way you light up when you talk about your students." The music ended before Gwen could formulate a response to such unexpected praise. Victor escorted her from the dance floor, his hand warm at the small of her back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, more dancing, though not exclusively with Victor, and a delicious supper served on long tables in the town square. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "May I see you home?" Victor asked as the celebration began to wind down. They walked in companionable silence, Victor leading his horse rather than riding. The night was clear, stars strewn across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. When they reached her cabin, Gwen hesitated at the door. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she offered, then immediately worried it might seem improper. Victor seemed to read her concern. "Better not. Town's small, and folks talk. Don't want to risk your reputation." His consideration touched her. "Thank you for a lovely evening, then." "Gwen," Victor said, his voice suddenly serious, "I'll be gone for a while, taking a herd to Denver. Probably 3 weeks, if the weather holds." "Oh." Disappointment washed over her, stronger than she would have expected. "Safe travels, then." Victor stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "I'd like to call on you properly when I return, if that would be welcome." Gwen's heart leaped. It would be very welcome. Victor smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, brief kiss. "Something to remember me by," he murmured as he straightened. "As if I could forget," Gwen replied, surprising herself with her boldness. His low chuckle warmed her as he mounted shadow. 3 weeks, he promised, and then he was gone, melting into the darkness beyond the reach of her lantern light. Gwen touched her fingers to her lips, still tingling from the kiss. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt not just content, but truly happy. She had found her place in this wild, beautiful land, and perhaps, just perhaps, found someone to share it with. The 3 weeks of Victor's absence stretched interminably. Gwen threw herself into her teaching duties, started a women's reading circle that met weekly in the schoolhouse, and began planning a Christmas pageant although the holiday was still months away. Anything to keep her mind occupied. Letters arrived from Victor twice, brief messages carried by travelers passing through Denver. The first simply assured her that the cattle drive had arrived safely and that business was proceeding well. The second, arriving nearly at the 3-week mark, contained news that made Gwen's heart sink. Unexpected business matters would delay his return by at least another week. "He signs it yours, Victor," Gwen told Mrs. Johnston, who had become a dear friend and confidant. "Do you think that means—" The older woman smiled knowingly. "I think it means exactly what you hope it means, dear. Victor Quinn is not a man who uses words lightly." Just when Gwen had resigned herself to an additional week of waiting, disaster struck. A sudden early snowstorm swept down from the mountains, catching many by surprise. School was canceled as parents kept children home, unwilling to risk the treacherous conditions. On the storm's second day, as Gwen was stoking her cabin stove against the biting cold, an urgent knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Hank, Victor's foreman, his hat and shoulders covered in snow. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his weathered face grave. "We got trouble at the ranch. 3 hands down with fever, bad one. Doc's there but says we need more help. Mr. Quinn's still in Denver, and there's no one else I trust to ask." "Of course I'll come," Gwen said without hesitation, already reaching for her coat. "Let me get my medical supplies." The ride to the Lazy Q was brutal. Wind-driven snow stung Gwen's face despite the scarf wrapped around it, and the trail was treacherously slick. Hank led the way, his broad back providing some shelter from the worst of the gale. The ranch house appeared through the swirling white, a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Hank helped Gwen dismount and hurried her inside, where blessed warmth enveloped her. Dr. Williams, a gruff man in his 60s who served as Silver Creek's only physician, looked up from the bedside of a young ranch hand. Relief crossed his tired face at the sight of Gwen. "Miss Zimmerman, thank God, we're fighting influenza here, and I can't be in 3 places at once." For the next 2 days, Gwen barely slept. She moved between the 3 sick men, applying cool compresses to fever-hot foreheads, coaxing water and broth between parched lips, and administering the medicines Dr. Williams prescribed. She had nursed her mother through her final illness and knew the grim routine well. By the 3rd day, the youngest ranch hand, barely 18, had turned the corner toward recovery. The other 2 men remained desperately ill, their breathing labored, their skin burning with fever. "Get some rest," Dr. Williams ordered Gwen late that afternoon. "You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse." Reluctantly, Gwen retreated to the small guest room Hank had prepared for her. She had just drifted into an exhausted sleep when shouting from below jolted her awake. Throwing a shawl around her shoulders, she hurried downstairs to find the front door open, snow swirling in, and a commotion in the main room. Victor stood in the center of the room, still wearing his snow-covered coat, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. His eyes found Gwen immediately. "You're here," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Hank got word to me in Denver about the sickness. I rode straight through." "You shouldn't have risked the pass in this weather," Dr. Williams scolded, but there was respect in his tone. "My men, my responsibility," Victor replied simply, then turned back to Gwen. "Hank said you've been here for days, helping." "Of course," Gwen said. "Where else would I be when people needed help?" Something shifted in Victor's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He crossed to her in 2 long strides and, heedless of their audience, took her hands in his. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for being the kind of woman who would ride through a blizzard to help strangers." "They're not strangers," Gwen replied softly. They're your family. And you. She hesitated, suddenly aware of the watching eyes of Dr. Williams and Hank. You matter to me. Victor's eyes darkened. For a moment, Gwen thought he might kiss her right there. Propriety be damned. Instead, he squeezed her hands gently before releasing them. I need to see the men, he said. Then we'll talk. The crisis peaked that night. The oldest of the sick ranch hands, a man named Thomas, who had been with Victor since the beginning, took a turn for the worse. His breathing became increasingly labored, his pulse erratic. Victor refused to leave his bedside. He sat in a chair beside Thomas, occasionally speaking softly to the unconscious man, his normally stoic face etched with worry. Gwen brought him coffee and food he barely touched, changed Thomas's compresses, and kept the fire burning bright against the howling storm outside. Near dawn, Thomas's fever broke at last. His breathing eased, and he fell into a natural sleep rather than the restless unconsciousness of illness. Dr. Williams, checking his patient, nodded with satisfaction. He'll live, he pronounced. Thanks in no small part to your care, Miss Zimmerman. Victor, who had been standing by the window watching the first gray light of dawn filter through the still falling snow, turned at the doctor's words. The relief on his face was palpable. You should rest, Gwen told him gently. You've been up all night after riding through a blizzard. For once, Victor didn't argue. He looked utterly drained, the stubble on his jaw dark against his pale skin, shadows beneath his eyes. Walk with me first? He asked. Just to the study. I need to speak with you. Victor's study was a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light over leather chairs and a woven rug that Gwen recognized as Navajo work. You have a beautiful home, she said, taking in the unexpected touches of refinement paintings on the walls, well-bound books, a chess set carved from pale and dark wood. It's been just a house until now, Victor replied, watching her. Seeing you here, it feels different. Gwen's pulse quickened at his words, at the intensity of his gaze. Victor. I had a speech prepared, he interrupted, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Practiced it all the way from Denver. But seeing you here, seeing how you cared for my men without hesitation. He took a step toward her. Gwen, I'm in love with you. The directness of his declaration took her breath away. There was no courtly phrasing, no poetic embellishment, just the simple, powerful truth spoken in his deep voice. I know it's too soon, he continued, when she didn't immediately respond. We've known each other only a few months. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. It's not too soon, Gwen whispered, finding her voice at last. Not when I feel the same way. Victor closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, gathering her into his arms. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more urgent, filled with all the worry and relief and longing of their separation. Gwen wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer, her entire body humming with joy and desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victor rested his forehead against hers. I was halfway to Denver when I realized I didn't want to leave you behind. Not for a cattle drive, not for anything. You've become the center of my world, Gwen, the reason I want to come home at the end of each day. I've been called many things in my life, Gwen said softly. A disappointment. A burden. Never someone's reason. Victor's arms tightened around her. You could never be a burden. You're a gift. My gift. He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. Your stepfather was a fool who couldn't see your worth. But I see you, Gwen. I see your courage, your kindness, your fierce intelligence. I see the woman I want to spend my life with. If you'll have me? Are you asking what I think you're asking? Gwen's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must feel it. Victor smiled, that rare, transformative smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Not yet. When I ask you to marry me, and I will, make no mistake it won't be when I'm half dead from exhaustion and haven't bathed in 3 days. A laugh bubbled up from Gwen's chest, born of relief and happiness, and the sheer wonder of this moment. I'd say yes anyway. I know, he said with endearing confidence, but you deserve better than a hasty proposal. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. For now, knowing you love me too is more than enough. A discreet knock at the study door interrupted them. They stepped apart as Hank entered, looking apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, boss, but the doc's ready to leave. Says the storm's letting up some. I'll see him out, Victor said. To Gwen, he added, rest now. We'll talk more when you wake. Gwen returned to the guest room, her mind whirling with all that had happened. She had come to Silver Creek expecting nothing but a chance to survive on her own terms. Instead, she had found purpose, community, and now love with a man whose strength was matched only by his tenderness. As she drifted toward sleep, Gwen realized she was no longer an unwanted burden, but something precious, the reason Victor Quinn wanted to come home. The following days at the Lazy Q took on a dreamlike quality for Gwen. As the snowstorm abated and the ranch hands recovered, she found herself reluctant to return to town. Victor seemed equally reluctant to let her go, finding reasons for her continued presence. The roads were still dangerous. The men needed monitoring. The schoolhouse would remain closed until the weather improved. They fell into a comfortable rhythm together. Mornings found them sharing coffee in the kitchen while discussing the day ahead. Victor would attend to ranch business while Gwen helped the cook, Mrs. Harmon, with meals or read to the recovering ranch hands. Evenings were spent in the study, where they talked for hours before the fire, learning the contours of each other's minds as thoroughly as they were beginning to learn each other's bodies through increasingly passionate embraces. You have more books than the town library, Gwen remarked one evening, running her fingers along the spines that lined his study shelves. Victor looked up from the ranch ledger he was reviewing. Reading got me through some dark times. After my parents, after Rebecca, books were the only escape I had. Gwen pulled a well-worn volume from the shelf, The Count of Monte Cristo, by Alexandre Dumas. This was my father's favorite. He read it to me in installments when I was too young to read it myself. It's one of my favorites as well, Victor said, setting aside the ledger. The Count's journey from despair to revenge to redemption. It spoke to me. Did you seek revenge? Gwen asked softly, remembering his story of loss and hardship. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Not in the way the Count did. But I promised myself I would succeed despite everyone who tried to keep me down. That I would build something lasting, something that would have made my parents and Rebecca proud. They would be proud, Gwen assured him, crossing to perch on the arm of his chair. You've built all this from nothing. Victor reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering against her cheek. It never felt complete until now. Until you. On the 5th day after the storm, a rider from town brought news that the roads were clear and school would resume the following Monday. There was no longer any reason for Gwen to remain at the ranch. I'll drive you back tomorrow, Victor said that evening as they sat before the fire. His voice was carefully neutral, but Gwen could sense his reluctance. I suppose I should go, she agreed. The children will be waiting. Victor took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I've been thinking, he began, then hesitated. A dangerous pastime, Gwen teased gently. His smile flashed briefly. Indeed. He grew serious again. These past days, having you here, it's felt right, Gwen. Like the final piece falling into place. Gwen's breath caught. It has felt right, she agreed. Victor set her hand aside and rose, crossing to his desk where he unlocked a drawer and removed a small wooden box. When he returned to Gwen, He didn't sit, but instead knelt before her chair. "I told you I wouldn't propose when I was half dead from exhaustion," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm well rested now, and I've had time to consider exactly what I want to say." Gwen's heart hammered against her ribs as Victor opened the box to reveal a ring, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires set in gold. "This was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of value I took when I left Pennsylvania. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it." "Victor," Gwen whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Gwendolyn Zimmerman," he said formally. "I came to Silver Creek looking for a place to belong. I found it, but something was still missing until you arrived. You've brought light and laughter into my life. You've shown me what it means to be truly brave, not just facing physical danger, but opening your heart despite past hurts." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Gwen said without hesitation, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, Victor. I love you. I want nothing more than to be your wife." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. His kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate as Gwen responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking Christmas," he murmured. "Unless that's too soon?" Gwen laughed, giddy with happiness. "Christmas is perfect." She glanced down at the ring glittering on her finger. "Do you think Silver Creek will be scandalized? The new schoolteacher and the rancher, engaged after just a few months?" "Let them talk," Victor said, echoing his words from the Founders' Day dance. "Anyone with eyes can see we belong together." The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. To Gwen's relief, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Her students were thrilled, the town matrons nodded approvingly, and even the school board expressed satisfaction that their teacher would have such a stabilizing influence in her life. "Told you folks would be happy," Mrs. Johnston said smugly when Gwen stopped by the boarding house to share the news. "Victor Quinn's been the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties for years. Many a mother has thrown her daughter in his path without success. They were beginning to think he'd never marry." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. Gwen continued teaching while also preparing for the school's Christmas pageant. Victor expanded the ranch house, adding a larger kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, he said, with a meaningful look that made Gwen blush. As the wedding approached, an unexpected letter arrived from Boston. Gwen recognized her stepfather's handwriting immediately, and her stomach knotted with dread. She opened it in the privacy of her cabin, hands trembling slightly. The contents were as cold and calculating as the man himself. Having learned of her impending marriage to a man of some means, news had traveled back east via business connections. Edward Zimmerman expressed his paternal concern and suggested a visit to ensure the match was suitable. Reading between the lines, Gwen understood that her stepfather, facing financial difficulties, hoped to benefit from her advantageous marriage. "Absolutely not," Victor declared when she showed him the letter that evening. "That man cast you out without a second thought. He has no place at our wedding or in our life." "I have no intention of inviting him," Gwen assured him. "But his letter made me realize something. I've been so happy. I haven't thought about my past at all recently. He has no power over me anymore." Victor drew her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You never needed me to rescue you, did you? You rescued yourself." "Perhaps we rescued each other," Gwen suggested, leaning into his embrace. Victor's answer was a tender kiss that spoke of all the years they would share together. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white. The small church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and every pew was filled with townsfolk and ranchers from miles around. Gwen wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Johnston and several other women had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to her mother. Her hair was adorned with a crown of winter berries and evergreen, and she carried a bouquet of pine cones and dried flowers from her garden. Victor, waiting at the altar, caught his breath when she appeared at the church door. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face shaven clean for the occasion. But it was the look in his eyes, wonder, love, absolute certainty that brought tears to Gwen's eyes as she walked toward him. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Victor Quinn and Gwendolyn Zimmerman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief, but deeply moving, when they exchanged vows promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. Gwen felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. Victor's voice never wavered as he pledged himself to her, and when he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his smile was radiant. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Quinn, you may kiss your bride." Victor needed no further encouragement. His kiss was reverent yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife. The celebration continued at the Lazy Q, where tables groaned with food prepared by women from town and surrounding ranches. There was music and dancing, toasts and laughter, and children running about in high spirits. As night fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" Victor murmured as they swayed together in a slow dance. "Impossibly so," Gwen replied, tilting her face up to his. "Though, I'm still getting used to my new name." "It suits you," he said, his arms tightening around her waist. "Almost as much as I hope I'll suit you as a husband." "You already do," she assured him. "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." Later, when the last guests had departed and they were finally alone, Victor led Gwen to their bedroom, now their shared room, transformed with new curtains she had sewn and the quilt from her aunt's house. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving a package from a drawer. "A wedding gift." Gwen unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages crisp and blank. Inside the cover, Victor had written in his strong, clear hand, "For my wife," that she might record the beginning of our story. "Our story," Gwen repeated softly, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Victor said, taking the journal and setting it aside. "And I intend to make it a very long and happy one." As he drew her into his arms, Gwen knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in the cabin behind the schoolhouse, or even in this fine ranch house, but in the heart of this good man who had seen value in her when others saw only burden. "I love you, Victor Quinn," she whispered against his lips. His answering smile was tender as he lowered his mouth to hers. "And you, Gwendolyn Quinn, are the reason I live." 5 years later, Gwen sat on the wide porch of the Lazy Q, watching as Victor taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his pony in the fenced yard. The boy's delighted laughter carried on the summer breeze as Victor led the gentle animal in a circle, one hand steadying James in the saddle. "Not too fast, you two," Gwen called, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly where their second child grew. The baby, active today, kicked against her palm as if eager to join the fun outside. "Mama, look, I'm riding like Papa," James called, his face alight with pride. "I see you, darling," Gwen replied, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. He was the image of Victor, with the same dark hair and striking eyes, though he had inherited Gwen's quick mind and love of books. From inside the house came the sounds of Mrs. Harmon preparing dinner. The mouth-watering aroma of beef stew and fresh bread drifted through the open windows. The Lazy Q had prospered over the years, expanding to become one of the largest operations in the territory. Victor had added sheep to their holdings despite initial skepticism from neighboring ranchers, proving that cattle and sheep could coexist profitably with proper management. Gwen had continued teaching until James was born, then reluctantly resigned her position. However, she hadn't abandoned education entirely. Twice weekly, she hosted reading classes for ranch hands and their families in the Lazy Q's newly built bunkhouse. Several men who had never held a book before could now read newspapers and write letters to distant family. Victor concluded the riding lesson and lifted James from the pony, swinging the boy onto his shoulders. Together, they crossed the yard to join Gwen on the porch. "Did you see me, Mama?" James asked again, his small hands clutching his father's hair. "I did. You're becoming an excellent horseman," Gwen assured him. "Just like your father." Victor set James down and took a seat beside Gwen on the swing, slipping an arm around her shoulders. At 34, he was in his prime, still powerfully built from daily physical work, his face more weathered but no less handsome to Gwen's eyes. Success and happiness had softened the hard edges that grief and struggle had carved into him when they first met. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his hand moving to cover hers on her belly. "Wonderful," Gwen replied truthfully, "though your daughter is practicing her dancing today." Victor's face lit up at the mention of a daughter. They had decided not to follow the convention of waiting until the birth to discuss the baby's gender. Gwen was certain this child was a girl, and Victor had embraced the idea with unexpected enthusiasm. "Rebecca," he said softly, speaking the name they had chosen to honor his long-dead sister. "I hope she has your spirit." "And your heart," Gwen added, leaning against his solid warmth. James, bored with adult conversation, had wandered off to play with the dog, a good-natured collie that followed the boy everywhere. His happy chatter to the animal mingled with birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle, the soundtrack of their life together. "I had a letter from Mrs. Thornton today," Victor said, referring to their former neighbor in Silver Creek, who had moved to Denver 2 years earlier. "She says the city continues to grow at an astonishing rate. The railroad has brought thousands of new settlers." "Do you ever regret staying here rather than moving to a bigger place?" Gwen asked, though she already knew the answer. Victor shook his head, his gaze sweeping over their property, the well-maintained ranch house, the sturdy barns and corrals, the rolling pastures dotted with cattle and sheep, and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. "Not for a moment," he said firmly. "This is where we built our life, where we found each other, where our children are growing up strong and free." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the same love she had seen in them on their wedding day. "Besides, everything I need is right here." Gwen reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar line of his jaw. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the ranch? During the blizzard? When you first told me you loved me?" Victor nodded, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I said you were the reason I wanted to come home at the end of each day." "And now?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Now," he said, his voice deepening with emotion, "you and James, and soon Rebecca, are the reason I live, the reason for everything I do." As the setting sun bathed the land in golden light, Gwen leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that what had once been her greatest sorrow, being cast out by her family as a burden, had led her to her greatest joy. A man who saw her as essential to his very existence, and a life richer than any she could have imagined in her darkest days. "I love you, Victor Quinn," she whispered, words she had spoken thousands of times over the years, but that never lost their power or truth. His arm tightened around her, and his lips brushed her temple. "And I love you, Gwendolyn Quinn, every day, more than the last. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat together in the peaceful stillness, surrounded by the home and family they had built through love, courage, and the unshakable belief in each other's worth.